there, Jar of Marble dwellers and Jar of Marble curious. My name is Linda. This is my podcast called Jar of Marbles. And this week I'm talking about listening. So shout out to the listeners. Shout out to you. Shout out to people that really do listen to us, and also all the different types of listening there is, and how different listening skills enable us to really understand what's going on around us, to form opinions, and also sometimes get to the bottom of things that you might not otherwise. Sometimes I think in our communication skill set, listening can sort of fall very sadly to the end. We miss cues, and I don't know whether it's because we live in a world where we're in screens all the time. We're not actually having face-to-face conversations with people so much, so we're not reading cues. We're not hearing the tone of someone's voice to go, oh, they're actually meaning something else, or they're requiring help or assistance or whatever. But so I just thought it was just something that we might like to have a bit of a yarn about, and I hope that this podcast finds you well and that life has been treating you great, and hey, let's go. We make meaning from sound. It's a mental process. If, say, it's raining quite loudly outside and you're having a conversation inside, you might say, oh, gee, it's raining heavy, but then you'll resume your conversation and ultimately you won't even hear the rain anymore. And then on top of that, we have filters, some of which are our beliefs, our values, intentions, culture, expectations, language, etc. And we're generally unaware of these filters. So the world now is more than ever, I feel like, such a noisy place that we might be more likely to switch off until we can get back to our cars or home. I have a friend who turns her hearing aids off when the external noise is too much. You know, there have been times when we've been in a cafe and the noise really does get really loud by the time someone's smashing in their chairs or pulling out from the table, and there's great, lots of laughter and things dropping on the floor and people coming in, and it sometimes can just be really quite overwhelming. And so there have been times when I've been a little bit envious as I sit in this noisy cafe with her trying to hear my friend's conversation, thinking, gee, I'd love to be able to turn mine off. Because sometimes, you might be doing the old al fresco thing and there's a building being built next door, and the noise of the trucks and everything that goes with it can just be, actually, to me, I just feel it's damaging. It's just awful. You cannot have a conversation. You're yelling at each other, then you look at each other and think, you know what, let's go inside or leave. Too often, it has made me wonder, how good are we then at actually listening? Too often I've observed that what has been said in a conversation has had a thoroughly incorrect response, because clearly someone just wasn't listening. And conscious listening creates understanding. So being in a world where no one's listening feels like a really scary place to be. And so it's a big shout out to those who have actually listened to you and, come back to you after, say, something's happened, someone's dropped something and then they've turned around and gone, so you were saying? How good does that feel when someone actually says that? No, you were saying something. I was interested in what you had to say. What was that you were saying? What was I saying? And then for you to be able to go, well, you were talking about that time you fell off the giraffe, or whatever it is. Those people stand out because it's, to me, like a dying skill, much like writing letters. Less likely to compromise simply means we are not listening to each other. I just find it interesting that when I'm saying, like, people are less likely to compromise, because they're not really listening. They're not listening with a caring ear of what you're saying. They've got their default response, or just don't let it bother you, or, oh, I had a really terrible time once, and then go off onto their big, long, winding story because they're going to outdo you. So, again, where is listening, really listening, being applied in those instances? Also, we shouldn't really be multitasking while talking to someone, because it makes a person feel invisible when you're sitting there with someone, you've gone out and they're on their phone. They've got their phone in their hand, they're responding to every, bell and they're responding to it, or they're picking it up, looking at it, deciding that doesn't matter. I mean, clearly they don't really want to be there, and it's. I just don't feel that it's it's just really shitty manners. Like, if someone's sitting there with a phone, unless you're expecting to find out that your house is on fire, someone's going to die, like, something that's impending, something that you have to attend to. Why are you even out having a coffee or a meal in the first place? So what people tend to do also is they will, as I was saying before, they try to equate their experience with yours. So if they're talking about losing a family member, don't start talking about the time you lost a family member. It's never the same. We experience things differently. We have a different background. Again, we've got different filters. We've had a different culture. We've had different experiences. So when people come out with these statements that are just, well, I just think they're bloody horrible, and it's just absolute ignorance. Like, clearly they're far more important than you. And I mean, clearly they're not, but they may as well say it. And I think that sometimes we're just maybe just having too many drugs. We're having too much of something, because it just doesn't add up when people continually don't hear what they are actually saying to people, because they don't care. They're very involved with themselves, and so you probably want to avoid those sort of people. But anyway, I find that in conversations, it's a good idea to ask open-ended questions, the who, what, why, when, etc., because it shows that you're really interested in what they have to say. And empathy, I feel, fuels connection, where you are taking the perspective of the other person, and you're staying out of judgment. You're staying out of adding your 5 cents worth as, it's like people that suffer really badly with anxiety. I never really knew, there was a time where I never really knew people that actually really suffered from anxiety. I don't even think it was a part of our psyche. I don't even know if it was really a part of our language. But unfortunately, over the years, I have come to know many people that suffer from various kinds of anxiety, and it is so limiting with some of them, and it's really, really unfortunate. And I say that with absolute, kindness in my heart. And there are other people who have never suffered from anxiety, don't seem to know anybody that's suffered from anxiety, and the mere word gets them going. They get riled. Oh, well, it's because, she's anxious, but she can't do that. It's like, well, no, because she really suffers with anxiety, and I just absolutely, it just blows my mind that these people, actually, have their license, they can drive cars, and they can function quite well in the world, but what they don't want to understand, they just don't want to understand. They don't want to feel another person's pain, and it's not about, well, that person annoys me anyway, so I can't offer them any understanding or empathy. But there are some things that are just, they're really, really difficult, and I really respect anybody that suffers from anxieties. I say anxieties because there's just so many different types, and because there's so many different types of people who have had different experiences. And I think that when you don't know what to say, but I think it's better just to say maybe that I don't really know what to say. I know, for example, back to hearing, when my mother was losing her hearing, she was absolutely sure that she wasn't. And she'd be in the lounge room watching TV, and it was so loud that I'd be at the door going, "Mum, the TV's so loud." But of course, she couldn't hear me. So I would have to go in, turn the TV right down, stand in front of the TV and go, "Mum, your hearing, there's something wrong with your hearing." And then she'd turn around and go, "Oh, I think it's about 4:30. It was like, and it did. It took her quite a while to accept that her hearing was not very good. So the listeners, this is a shout out to the listeners, a shout out to people who take the time to listen, the people that try to say, hey, maybe that's not the only way to look at things, for the people that are kind enough to listen with an empathic ear, with kindness, and not judge and not decide that they know everything there is to know under the sun. I mean, it must be very lonely knowing everything, mustn't it? Because at the end of the day, if you know everything, there's nothing to learn. So as plebs, what can I say? It's just, we have to put up with you. Another form of listening, I feel, well, we call it intuition. When you don't know how you know, but you know, and you know, but that's all you need to know. It's like that other sense where you get a very strong feeling about something, or even in that moment when you're talking with somebody, be it with them or on the phone or even texting, there is a sense we know when something isn't right, or what you're being told isn't the full story, or they've not answered your question. In fact, they just haven't answered your question. They've openly gone on to some other subject because clearly that subject's just a wee bit too hot for them, or whatever the circumstances may be. But sometimes in regard to hearing, depending on what we hear, can be the reason why we believe something is real. And an example that comes to my mind is many years ago, back in, it was the mid-'80s, I decided that I was going to start a cleaning company, and I called it the Extra Touch Cleaning Company for any of my clients out there of old. Hello? No, I'm not available. And I was doing galleries, doctor surgeries, homes, and it went really well, really quickly. So fast that I actually had to stop taking clients. It just sort of, yes, it just exploded. And why it did was, I believe, is I had not long come back from America. I had taken my daughters to Disneyland, and one of my daughter's toys was a book that had sound effects with it, where you press the button and a cow mooed. And one of the buttons was a telephone, and it just happened to be the exact sound of a Sydney telephone ring. Unbelievable. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to use that telephone ring for when people ring and make inquiries about my cleaning company. I mean, clearly I was quite confident I was going to start this cleaning company. I was going to advertise and people were going to ring. And they did. So, which is great. And so people would ring, and I've got Extra Touch Cleaning Company, can I help you? And I had no clients whatsoever, and they're wanting to know how much I charged and what days were available. And at that time, I only had Friday available, which was completely untrue. I had every day of the week available. So I wanted to create that sense of urgency. But at that moment, I would hit that little button on my daughter's book, and the phone would ring, and I would ask them to hold the line. And then meanwhile, I'd go, Extra Touch Cleaning Company, can I help you? Yes, can I just ask you to hold the line a moment? I'm just talking with another client. Thank you. Then I'd go back, yes, sorry. So then we'd resume the conversation. Then I'd hit the phone again. So that would then be two people waiting. Oh, you really are busy. Look, I'm going to have to book in on the Friday. Yeah, I'm sorry, I've only got 3 available spots. Gave the lady the times, and that's how I got started. But, I mean, it was hilarious because a person was hearing the phone ringing and I'm answering the phone to take another inquiry. It was totally believable that I had this really busy business. And if you'd listened to my other podcast, I think it was the last one, I'm not sure, maybe the one before, and I talked about when I started my very first sandwich bar, and I used a very similar tactic where I got my sister to call, and I would pretend to take down morning tea and lunch orders, and in the end she'd ring and I'd just ask her, don't call, because I actually had got busy. So I only needed to use that a few times, and then the business actually started to develop. But the point being is people heard that, thought that it was a busy business, wanted to get on board, wanted to make an appointment as soon as possible. But I mean, the upside of it was I was offering a really good service, and that was the feedback that I was getting back pretty quickly, was that they had been paying people for sometimes years, and they used to come home and always wonder what it was the cleaner had actually done. And even in office spaces, that was the feedback. Oh, please don't ever leave. We just figured that was as good as it was going to get, and now that you've been here, we realised that the place was just not being cleaned, well, at least not adequately. So now that I've finished tooting my own horn, you always toot your horn. Oh, be quiet, Bob. He's just jealous. Anyway, so it is all listening, isn't it? And I just look, honestly, that could have easily not worked, but it did. And so sometimes using our senses in order to create a picture in another person's mind is enough for a person to jump on board. It wasn't like I was offering something that I wasn't doing, but I was certainly wanting to offer the sense of, well, you better get on board because once the places are filled, they are filled. And actually, interestingly enough, after 6 weeks' time, I didn't have any spaces. I couldn't take on any more clients. Trying to find people who would not only be reliable and also be good cleaners was unbelievably challenging. So I had to keep it just with my sister-in-law at the time, and the business did so well that she ended up being able to use that as a deposit on her first apartment, which was absolutely fantastic, and you're welcome. But moving on to the next thing, how good do you feel when someone has listened to you and maybe even thrown in a couple of pearls of wisdom that just comes down the brain, words that you can relate to, words you can think on later and feel like you're going to be okay? It's that feeling of two people speaking the same language and you have to find 3 different ways of saying the same thing. The relief of being heard stops overthinking. It stops sacrificing your needs to please others. You will make better decisions when you've had an opportunity just to say what you need to say and ask for, someone that you trust's opinion, not just anybody, someone that will go, okay, well, this sounds like a great idea, but still puts it back on your lap and go, yeah, but what do you want to do? Things don't disturb you as much. They lose their power because you've been heard. Someone has listened. And then you feel like the wind is back in your sails and the space comes back into your body and your mind. Life is filled with so many interruptions and we can feel like a product of our environment at times. Having someone to listen to us is really a game changer. It can stop you from doubting yourself, and even if it's just for a time. What about psychometric testing? When you get tested, your hearing's tested before starting a job. I remember when I was working for a particular place, I ended up having my hearing tested twice. It wasn't just me, it was everybody. The first time I got, because they wanted to make sure that after the fact they weren't going to come back and sue them, it was their fault, that the job they got you to do impaired your hearing. But the second time, I think they just didn't know what to do with us, so they all put us through a hearing test again. The good news was mine had improved in 3 days, so that was really great. Makes you wonder, doesn't it? And what about selective hearing? Guilty as charged. That I don't think there's a person on the planet that, can say, oh, no, I hear everything that everyone says at all times. Some people, I think, are just better at it. Like selective hearing can be, when someone isn't taking out the garbage and they didn't hear you say that it needed out. It's not like it's their responsibility or anything like that. Really, I remember with a partner that I would notice mid-conversation that his eyes had glazed over and he was sort of looking afar, sort of over my shoulder, and wasn't listening anymore. Initially, I used to accuse him of that, and it was really obvious that he wasn't listening. And instead of just going, yeah, you know what, I zoned out, I wasn't listening, please tell me again, because that's cool, right? Shit can happen, and I get that. But this person, there's no way were they ever going to be wrong about anything. Anyway, subsequently, what I would do is I would stop mid-sentence and then I would leave the room. And not once did he ever say, you've left the room? You've left the room. Thank you, Bob, Captain Obvious. Or I would slide in something ridiculous into the sentence. I would say I was talking about a holiday in Fiji and obviously all the blue elephants and the gronchiol caterpillars that, fall out of the lettuces is quite suspect. And he would just go, yeah, yeah, yeah. So when you're told when you've told someone an important piece of news, and then it's referred to in the future, and they tell you that you never told them, that also is selective hearing. I also think that different forms of gossip is hearing impediment / selective hearing / gossipy hearing, hairy gossipy. Anyway, so I remember once I arrived at a bar. It was back in the days when I was in a band, and because we would play most weekends, I didn't really get to go out very much on the weekends because I was singing in a band. So this weekend I'd gone out, and a friend or someone came up to me and went, "Oh, how was Fiji?" I was like, "I have no idea. How is Fiji?" Said, "Oh, such and such told me that you were over in Fiji and you went with some guy," and it's like, no, I didn't. But I could tell by this person's, their whole body language and the expression on their face, it was a done deal. I clearly wasn't telling the truth, and that I really had gone to Fiji. But can I just tell you, oh jar of marble dwellers, that I didn't. That was not true. I was probably on the other side of town that weekend singing in the band. There was no way I had left town. But anyway, it had turned into this really big gossipy thing. I have been at the end of a lot of gossip in my life. It's quite interesting. It's never really bothered me. It's just now and then something gets back to you. And depending on the time span, it really is nothing short of hilarious. The only problem with things like that is that depending on who tells you or who feels the need to tell you, they're never going to believe you if you turn around and go, "No, that didn't happen. No, that definitely didn't happen." And then it's like, it's all right, it's okay. I'll keep it close. I won't. That's like, you can tell anyone you like, but it's not true. That actually didn't happen. But the gossip that has got back to me, the stories that people have told, I remember one in particular which was so good. It was so great, so satisfying. And I mean, this was a little bit more than just overhearing something. It was timing. The timing was perfect. This guy, I was at a party, and it was a little bit rural, and there were cars and trucks and utes all parked, outside this house that would seem as the middle of nowhere. And I was coming down the side of the house, and I heard this guy talking about how he had, done the L Loop Deloop with me at some other party at some other time, and it was absolutely not true. I didn't even really know this guy, and I just happened to be walking down the path. He was sitting at the end of a ute on the flat tray, the back of a ute, telling this small group of people something about me, which was that he'd, and I went, "Oh, did I enjoy it?" And well, he went all shades of red and purple. He wasn't, obviously wasn't thick-skinned enough to be able to, try and make out that I was lying. And everyone just laughed. But my God, if I'd been 1 minute, further back down that path or after walking past the truck, I would have missed that. But I could not believe my ears. I heard my full name and what we apparently had done together, and it was just like, yeah, no, that's not true, and you're not going to be able to wave that little flag. But I suppose that's probably a common thing with so many women, and maybe with guys too, where people have boasted about sleeping with a person like that's something to boast about. But there was probably an era or a time where no one really thought twice about it, depending on the circles that you travelled in, I guess, where, people would say that they slept with someone because they sort of thought that would give them some kind of status, or I don't know, really. I just never felt the need to advertise, specifics. No, it was never a thing for me at all. I just rolled my eyes so hard that I was checking out my own butt. So I guess, he burnt a bridge. Burnt a bridge that night. I couldn't even tell you who that person was now. I mean, not that I really knew him anyway, but that's another topic in itself, isn't it, about burning bridges? And I don't regret burning my bridges at all. I regret, though, that some people weren't on those bridges when I burnt them. Oh, that's not very nice. That's right, Bob. No regrets here, doll. What I should have said to her is, I like my man how I like my coffee, sliding off the roof of my car as I drive away. Stop it, Bob. So that's that, Jar of Marble Dwellers. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I was just thinking about how wonderful it's been, the feedback that I've received already with such a new podcast, and I just wanted to thank you so much for your feedback, for your presence. It really does mean a lot. It's something that I've been wanting to do for quite some time, and it's so great to know that there's a little bit of support out there. It's rather magical, actually. So you guys were actually the inspiration behind, shout out to the listeners. And then when I just thought about it a little bit more, I thought, well, that could apply to so many things. But, meanwhile, we've got to get going, don't we? It's always heavenly being together. Say good day to the family and the cat for me. And I'll see you again soon. Okay, bye.